Hello everyone and welcome to this next video talking you through chapters 2, 3 and 4 of Frankenstein. Remember, of course, you've got the worksheets to go with this, so you can be filling in how characters develop, key moments in each chapter, and of course you can be thinking about key quotations and how to analyse those quotations. So we're on page 29 and we're looking at chapter 2. Remember, we've just kind of finished chapter 1 where Victor Frankenstein has been promised Elizabeth. She was mine only. So we're carrying on with Victor's childhood and we're looking on page 30 here. From his relationship with Elizabeth to look more at his reasons for going into science. So on page 30, the world was to me a secret which I desired to divine. So we're starting to see curiosity, earnest research to learn the hidden laws of nature. So this is young Victor. But it sets up those things as an adult where he's starting to think about those wider themes, that wider desire to find the secrets of nature out as well. Further down on page 30, this idea, his parents were the agents and creators of all the many delights which we enjoyed. So still going back to that theme we looked at in chapter 1, of this idea that his parents are agents and creators of his many delights. He's got a happy childhood, and that contrasts with how his treatment of the creature. And interestingly, Victor himself recognises that my temper was sometimes violent and my passions vehement. And we see that later on, this idea foreshadowing his passions being vehement. He's not so much talking about love there, he's talking about his... he doesn't have any real kind of constant approach to anything. Think of balanced characters like Clerval. Victor Frankenstein is the exact opposite. He veers from one extreme to the other. And that's particularly seen when it comes to creating and then destroying the female creature as well. Page 31, he goes on to talk about Clerval as well. And then he talks about studying Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus and Cornelius Agrippa as well. So he's studying science of the time. And then on page 33, wealth was an inferior object, but what glory would attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render the man invulnerable to any but a violent death. Basically, Victor's driving motive is glory. He wants to be remembered in the annals of science. Paracelsus, Albertus Magnus, Isaac Newton, Victor Frankenstein. He wants his name along there as well. And then he gets kind of excited by the stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak and the blasted stump that's left over there as well, the power of nature to destroy. And that contrasts with the creature who we see later on, who burns the de Lacy's cottage down as well. So Victor sees this he's attracted to the powers of nature, of creation, and the creature is attracted to the powers of nature for destruction. But within mankind there's some kind of link to fire as a means of getting this glory he mentions at the top of page 33. And then on page 34, finally, the last thing of chapter 2, destiny was too potent and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. And you can look at this in a couple of ways. First of all, her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. This idea that Victor's path is set for him very early on. In chapter 2, the events and this idea that nature's destiny's set himself on a path. His destiny is too potent, too strong, and he can't move away from that path. Looking at alternatives or deeper ways of reading this, though, think about the number of times in Frankenstein, nowhere early on in the novel yet, that Victor actually looks to not take responsibility for his actions. And here's another example of this. It's not my fault that I created the creature and the creature destroyed my family and led to my downfall. It's actually destiny's fault, and it's too easy to blame destiny. So it's a nice little alternative there. And then chapter 3. So we start chapter 3. So Victor's again developing his childhood. He's now 17 and he's going off to university at Ingolstadt, which is in Germany, so not a million miles away from Geneva. Elizabeth gets sick, but of course Victor's mum gets ill. She catches scarlet fever from Elizabeth and she dies early on. And this is not really mentioned in Frankenstein, but thinking about the impact that would have on young Victor, as it would any young person, any 17-year-old person, this is a massive psychological impact on Victor. And what's quite interesting is that with some of the film versions you watch, it's actually Victor's mother's death that becomes the catalyst for Victor to go on and study science. That's not so mentioned in the novel, but it's an interesting point to make that, why is Victor so desperate? Is it just glory, or because of the death of his mother, is he trying to find some way of bringing her back to life as well? Which, of course, we know is going to be in vain because, in 2020 it still hasn't happened now. But, Victor is kind of driving towards that there as well. He mentions grief, but he also mentions the time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity on page 35. So what he's saying there is that, for Victor, grieving over his mother is something that he doesn't need to do. It's something that it's an indulgence, really. When we indulge ourselves, we might overeat, we might have too much to drink, we might kind of go out and party or something like that. But here it's grief for his dead mother that Victor isn't indulging in, and it kind of starts to show you his attitudes towards life and death and how it starts to change here, how he becomes separated from reality and his family and becomes scientist Victor and devoted scientist Victor. Victor obviously leaves and he meets his kind of professors, Kremper and Woolman. And Kremper, obviously, Kremper decries everything he's studying. Albertus Magnus and Paracelsus he completely disagrees with. And Victor obviously takes against Kremper because of that, calls him a little squat man. But then Waldman excites Victor's curiosity, and he felt as if my soul were grappling with a palpable enemy. One by one, the various keys touch which form the mechanism of my being. It's quite nice. It's interesting. Using creation imagery here, Shelley's describing Victor looking at himself growing up, kind of grappling with a palpable enemy. What is that enemy? It's not the creature at this point. Is it Victor's conscience? Does he know that what he's doing is wrong? Is it kind of Victor as a man, or Victor becoming a scientist? A man who would look after his family who was suffering at this time, or the scientist who deserts his family for 2 years to devote himself to study? And it's interesting, so much has been done to exclaim the soul of Frankenstein. Victor's now referring to himself as the soul of Frankenstein. And that's a lovely quotation to analyse, because you've got the idea that Victor is working so hard on creation. Is he a man or just a soul of a being? Is he kind of a person devoid of any soul? Thinking about what he's actually doing as well, does he need to have almost his soul removed, any kind of moral conscience or good, in order to kind of go about what he's doing? You've also got the idea that his soul, thinking about Victor's crimes as he goes through the novel, the things that he does, creating the creature, abandoning the creature, the various deaths which, yes, the creature does, but Victor is responsible for. Is this idea, does this mark the kind of the departure of his soul, or is it just Victor being kind of arrogant again? The soul of Frankenstein. And of course, Waldman's happy to have gained a disciple, so again, use of religious imagery. And Waldman, of course, is interested in this idea of not creation of new life necessarily, but using kind of chemistry to develop life and to develop these things that other scientists, the scientist Victor mentions earlier on, have been used. And thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. So again, it's because of Waldman's interest in Victor's scientific discovery that he becomes a disciple of Waldman, and he kind of absorbs everything that Waldman says, takes all that on board and devotes himself to his studies. So chapter 4. Chapter 4 is quite an interesting one. I mentioned earlier on, 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva. So Geneva is obviously Victor's home, and he rejects home here. He becomes an obsessed scientist. He's obsessed in everything he's mentioned. And although he doesn't perhaps mention to Waldman that he's trying to find the secret of human life, he devotes himself to that study, as people in the time would have believed. This might have been able if you devote yourself to study and study and study. It's why we spend so much money on medical research, in every country, to try and fight disease. And obviously this was a concern of the time, trying to fight death. And you've seen in the context videos about the experiments of Galvani and Aldini and their ability to bestow life on lifeless matter. But Victor rejects his family here, and he's engaged heart and soul. So his heart's kind of taken from his family and delivered to science here at this point. And obviously, because of the nature of Victor's work, this would be quite shocking for an audience at the time, or for a readership at the time, because essentially Victor is dealing with dead bodies and parts of corpses. His work is to observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body, and also to find bodies to do this work on. And we've seen the work, the research on body snatchers at the time, and how all kinds of bodies were being given up to medical science. Darkness had no effect on my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which from the being of seat of beauty and strength had become food for the worm. So this is quite an interesting point. Firstly, Victor's essentially decrying religion here. A church bodies deprived of life. So no religious purpose for this churchyard, but merely just a place for Victor to help himself to dead bodies there for his scientific discovery, which was starting over the course of Mary Shelley's life to be given some kind of legal credence, but it was often only criminals. You couldn't go and help yourself to whoever you wanted. From the being the seat of beauty and strength, so mankind is a form of beauty and strength, and is now just food for the worm as well. And also darkness had no effect upon my fancy. So earlier on we've seen how he's not concerned about the death of his mother. He's now not concerned with darkness either. And of course Victor starts to develop the ability to create life, and this is really his motives for it. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. So a new species would bless me as its creator and source. And this is Victor playing God. This is a key idea in Frankenstein, this idea that Victor has gone so far beyond the realms here of natural law. This idea that we have certain laws of nature as mankind. If, for instance, we build and build and build and build lots of things, or we drive cars, and we're kind of petrol cars, for instance, pollution will destroy the planet gradually for us. There's this element of natural law here. Victor is going beyond natural law because he wants to have a new species of humanity to bless him as their creator and source. But also religion. He wants to be God here. He wants to be blessed as a god. He wants a new species. He wants to be the creator as God was in the Bible as well, and he wants to pour a torrent of light into our dark world as well. He wants to be light. But it comes at some cost, obviously, initially and also later on in the novel. First of all, my cheek had grown pale with study. And this is the kind of chapter where he's talking about how he gets the instruments to create life as well. This would be quite an interesting chapter to get if you had this as an extract in your exam on page 43. And what you could do is highlight a couple of key quotations here as well. I'm not saying they're key now, but one or two of these would be interesting to discuss if you got the extract. The horrors of my secret toil. Dabbled, almost playing with the kind of dead bodies here, not really, not in a kind of a as a game sense here, but just dabbled. These kind of human beings that once meant something to some people are now just something for Victor to kind of use as to experiment with. Among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal. We've seen the experiments by Aldini and Galvani. They are a form of torture. He collects bones from charnel houses, funeral houses, with his profane fingers, the tremendous secrets of the human frame. So, while we've got all this pretty gothic, ghastly imagery here, you've also got this idea of the tremendous secrets of the human frame and the necessary of scientific discovery. And this is a great quotation. Victor talks about his workshop of filthy creation. You've got a kind of almost paradox there of the creation, the positive power of his work, juxtaposed with this adjective filthy because of the kind of how a reader would perceive what he's doing as morally wrong, as a crime against God, as a crime against humanity, and also just the nature of what he's kind of working with as well as being filthy. And he's got his dissecting room and the slaughterhouse and where he gets his beings to work with from. So you've got all this gruesome graphic imagery there, and this would be quite a good extract to get in the exam for that. And finally, my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature. This idea that outside, while Victor is working, it's quite a beautiful time, beautiful season, but Victor isn't bothered by that. He's insensible to the charms of nature, and nature is used so many different times in Frankenstein to convey different meanings, often to reflect the emotions of characters, as a romantic novel with a capital R, and you'll look at that during lesson time. But this idea that here, nature doesn't bring any joy to Victor here as well. He's not bothered by it because he's so busy creating the creature, but it does a little bit later on. I could not tear my thoughts from my employment, lonesome in itself, but which had taken an irresistible hold of my imagination. So he's now completely absorbed in his work. It's got an irresistible hold over him as well. And he's kind of checked by anxiety, which got at the bottom of page 44. I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to a most painful degree. I shunned my fellow creatures if I'd been guilty of a crime. So Victor's starting to become anxious. He's starting to develop a fever, and he's nervous here. He's starting to kind of have fits of nervousness as well. And I shunned my fellow creatures as if I'd been guilty of a crime here. And this idea, that it's almost simile there, really, I suppose. I shunned them as if, the use of as there. But actually, it's not quite a simile in that, he is guilty of many, many crimes here. Perhaps not legal crimes necessarily, but certainly moral crimes, and certainly crimes against God as well, which would and should and do bring some kind of punishment as well. So you've got lots of graphic detail there. You've got lots of information about Victor's motives for becoming this successful scientist, and there's lots of ways you can link in context when you're filling in your grids or annotating your books about this as well. Please remember that context is never just a bolt-on history lesson, so try and talk about those wider ideas. There's Victor kind of playing God, for instance. Why is Mary Shelley using these graphic and gothic detail, these horrific details? Why does Victor want to be like God? How does that link into Paradise Lost and the Bible? And just complete your grids and annotate in as much detail as you can. You start to see in this video we've got a nice combination of things that would be good in an extract and quotations that you should go away and learn as well. And next time we'll look at the creature actually coming to life as well.